Is the April 8th eclipse a sign of judgment on the USA? Tomorrow's eclipse is the most anticipated solar eclipse in history. Emergencies have been declared in states in advance all along the path of the eclipse, and National Guardsmen have been called out to control the crowds. But what makes this eclipse all the more interesting than any that came before, is the spiritual component that's flooding the internet. On the one side are videos like Jim Staley's recent one that garnered like 3.5 million views, which takes the side that this is a prophetic event. On the other side is Remnant Radio's recent video with 24.5 thousand views, which says Staley's video is malarkey and maybe devil worship. So, which one are you to believe? This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and you tell us all the time that you follow this channel because here you get a balanced biblical view of events just like this. Is it prophetic or not? Today we're going to lay out the case for both sides. Here's Staley's summary of his position.
And so when 5 planets line up, out of 8, on a solar eclipse on Nisan 1 with the Devil's Comet, hasn't been around in 71 years, right? With cicadas that haven't been out since 1803, just a few short years before the War of 1812 and the biggest earthquake in the continental United States history, along with red heifers being sacrificed, a hadron collider that is fixing to open up the time-space continuum, and all of this is happening on the same day? Now, I am the last conspiracy theory that's out there. I don't even hardly do videos like this. Going out on a limb like this and getting into current events is not something that I normally do, but I believe so strongly that the coincidences here just mathematically don't line up. It's worth us taking a look at.
So Staley's position is one of coincidence and mathematics. Can all of these things be happening on the same day and it still be only a coincidence? Here's what Joshua Lewis of Remnant Radio had to say.
Today we're talking about the eclipse that is taking place here. A lot of prophetic voices, a lot of calendar folk are getting super involved in this space and saying, hey, this means this means that. Maybe they're saying it's the end of the world. We'll see.
This one guy that we're going to look at, how many views does his video have? Was it 3 million views?
3.3 million views on this one video. So yeah. If you want, I just heads up for anybody who wants a super popular YouTube channel, just predict events based off of astrological symbols and say it's Christian. So just jump into astrology, start making predictions on Jewish calendars and say, this is what's going to happen. I know the future. You will accrue a massive audience and make lots and lots of money.
A solar eclipse happens every 18 months and or so. But really,
so Josh is being a little tongue-in-cheek here, maybe even, if I hear it right, with a hint of jealousy, but he and his co-host, Michael Roundtree's basic point is also mathematical, similar to Staley's. Their point is eclipses happen all the time. And this one means nothing more than any other eclipse. Josh also calls using astronomical signs astrology. So who's right and who's wrong in this? Can we know? The first thing to examine is, does God use the sun and the moon for signs? Can signs in the sky be anything other than astrology, which of course is forbidden by God? The answer to that's pretty clear. Yes, God does use signs in the sky. In the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1:14, we read, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years." So God definitely uses the sun, moon, and stars for signs. So an eclipse can be a sign, but not every eclipse is a sign. But some definitely will be in the future, as you will see in a second. However, the guys at Remnant Radio disagree. In multiple places in their video, they contend God stopped using signs in the sky with the coming of the Holy Spirit. So I have to ask them, does that mean the sixth seal and the darkening of the sun, moon, and stars isn't about celestial objects? In Luke 21, When God says there'll be signs in the sun, moon, and stars in the end times, does that mean Luke wasn't talking about celestial signs? And they mentioned the great sign of Revelation 12, the sign in Virgo, and say Revelation 12, 1 through 5 isn't a celestial grouping of signs. In fact, they use the term, "that's a hard no," when discussing it. They even term using celestial signs as divination. And to me, that's just taking things a bit too far. Somebody can be wrong, but calling them satanic, that might be going beyond the bounds. Now, I respect the guys at Remnant Radio. I listen to them a lot, and a lot of their work is very high quality. And I don't like to pick on other YouTube teachers, but calling something devil worship when it appears in multiple places in the New Testament as signs given by Jesus and the angel of Revelation, well, my personal comment on that, guys, is just because you haven't figured out the prophecy doesn't mean you should close your mind to what God can do or can accomplish, or call out people who are trying to figure it out. By the way, we have a video that does explain all the signs in Revelation 12, the one back in 2017, and the 3 coming up in 2028, 2030, and 2031. If you're also skeptical, just give it a watch. The link is down in the description. Now, in terms of eclipses, did you know they likely only occur on Earth and nowhere else in the universe? That's a huge statement. How can we make that? The reason is the ratio of the size of the sun to the size of the moon is exactly proportional to the ratio of the distance of the sun and the moon to the earth. This allows a smaller object, the moon, to exactly and completely block out a much larger object, the sun, during an eclipse. The only planet that we know of where this is true in the whole universe is the earth. So this, in my opinion, is definitely a God thing, not solely some natural phenomenon. It's a God thing by precise and specific design. And by the way, if you're looking for a great God fact to share with your spiritually skeptical friends tomorrow as everybody's watching the eclipse or listening to it on TV, tell them this and watch their reactions. New moons are also important for determining the start of years. In the Hebrew calendar, there are 2 years running simultaneously, 6 months apart, a religious year that starts on Nisan 1, which happens to be the date of our eclipse, April 8th, and the agricultural year, civic year, that begins 6 months later on Tishri 1. And this year, solar eclipses are going to happen on both of these days. Interesting, isn't it? Both Hebraic years are going to start this year with an eclipse. Maybe there's an auspicious reason for that. We'll get to that in a moment. And whether the eclipse is a sign from God or not, and specifically, if it's a sign of judgment on the USA. That's our question for today. So if you listen to Staley and Remnant Radio, it appears to come down to mathematics and what might happen. Both camps use math as their primary proof. Josh and his co-host Michael Roundtree made the point that solar eclipses are common, like once every 18 months. So their opinion is there's nothing to see here. Why should this eclipse be different from any other eclipse in history? Jim Staley says the preponderance of coincidences of other events on April 8th make it super unlikely that this isn't a sign from God. What do we think? Let's take a look. On this channel, my advisors and I believe that this is the central question as to whether or not this is a sign or not. Whether this eclipse is just any old eclipse or if it's one of extreme prophetic importance. The question is one of coincidences. Could all these things happen on the same day by random chance? Let's look at the first item, the Hebrew date, Nisan 1. And the second eclipse, the one that happens later this year on Tishri 1, how often is that going to happen? That there are eclipses on both the first days of both Hebrew years? I'd have to say it's pretty rare, but I wouldn't make a decision based on that alone. Second, this solar eclipse over the USA is not happening in a vacuum. It's the third solar eclipse over the USA in 7 years, 2 total eclipses and an annular ring of fire eclipse. In combination, the paths of the solar eclipses form the shape of the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph and Tav, in the ancient Paleo-Hebrew script that King David used. Now, Aleph and Tav are the Hebrew equivalent of Alpha and Omega in the Greek. Jesus said he is the Alpha and Omega, so in a way, Jesus signed his name to this set of eclipses. What are the odds of that? Even more rare than the dates, in my opinion. Third, as Staley pointed out, all 8 planets are on the same side of the sun on April 8th, and 5 are aligned on that day. In fact, all will be visible either by naked eye or telescope in the zone of totality when the sun darkens. What are the odds of that? This happens about every 500 years that they line up like this, and it's been linked to volcanic and seismic activity in the past. And yes, there already has been an earthquake in New York City that shook the Statue of Liberty on Friday. Fourth, there will be a comet, the so-called Devil Comet, visible in the zone of totality as well. What are the odds of that? Has there ever been a visible comet during a solar eclipse? I don't know. But there's never been one nicknamed the Devil Comet in the zone of totality before. I'm pretty sure of that. So from an astronomical point of view, this is a very unusual event, a once in the history of the world kind of sign. But does that make it a sign from God or just a coincidence? No, it's not necessarily a sign from God yet, but it does make it very rare. So the argument that they happen every 18 months is that this one is different than the others. So let's look at the events happening in the USA on or about tomorrow. Staley said the first is the coming of a 100-year cicada or locust bloom emerging from the ground. Well, certainly interesting, but in my opinion, not that important. Staley also mentioned that the 1812 earthquake at the New Madrid fault line followed an eclipse and was the most severe earthquake in the recorded history of the USA. Now, if one happens this April, just like that, we will have a match. But this hasn't happened yet. We'll only know in retrospect. So our advice is one of watching and seeing what happens. And third is something that only this channel has reported on. On the day after the last 2 eclipses in the USA in 2017 and 2023, on the very next day, the USA's Secretary of State met with Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia to discuss the 2-state solution. Both times, the meeting happened the day after the eclipse. In Joel 3:2, we know that Jesus judges the nations upon his return for just that, dividing the land of Israel. Don't believe me? Look it up. What the 2-state solution is all about, after all, is the dividing of Israel. So this brings judgment and the reason for judgment into the picture of this eclipse, something that Staley and the Remnant guys both seem to miss. What's going to happen this week? What's going to happen? Is Blinken going to meet with MBS again? Or someone else? Well, Blinken is out of the country. He was in Belgium and France talking about, you guessed it, Israel and the Middle East. And just a day or so ago, Biden called Netanyahu about the Central Kitchen event where aid workers were killed. Biden was calling for Israel to be held accountable. Events are building tension in the Middle East. But just like with an earthquake, let's see what happens first. Let's see what happens this week. If it has to do with the division of Israel into 2 states, we will have a very significant match. This is the most important match of all, in our opinion, if it occurs, and totally biblical. Now, Staley mentioned the fact that the CERN-Hadron Collider is starting up on April 8th, the same day as the eclipse. CERN, of course, is a 17-mile underground tube in Switzerland that sends atoms smashing into each other at nearly the speed of light, possibly opening a portal to other dimensions. Listen to what one of their directors said. Quote, "Out of this door might come something, or we might send something through it." And that was a quote from Sergio Bertolucci, Director of Research and Scientific Computing at CERN. That's really dangerous spiritual stuff. CERN is the same organization that has a statue of Shiva the Destroyer from Indian mythology on their grounds. The statue pictures Shiva dancing through a flaming portal. Are they planning on bringing Shiva into this world? Shiva is the name of the Indian version of the being known as Abaddon or Apollyon in Revelation 9, the king of the bottomless pit, a being known in Hebrew as the Destroyer. Are they planning on summoning Apollyon? But just like the idea of an earthquake, or the two-state solution in the Middle East, or CERN opening another dimension and demons coming out, all these things are possible, but not guaranteed. That's why Jesus and Paul commanded us to watch in the scriptures 19 times. Watch. Pay attention to what God is doing, they say. Pay attention to the signs he is giving us. So when the paths of 3 eclipses form the Hebrew letters Aleph and Tav, Jesus' signature, so to speak, watch what happens next. Maybe nothing. But what happens next might just be the 4th in the series of the 4 solar eclipses. It might take 6 months. An annular or ring of fire eclipse on Rosh Hashanah of this year. The same date, the United Nations is planning what they call the most important summit in our lifetimes. Those are big words. Their stated purpose at that summit for the future is to have the nations surrender their national sovereignty to the UN to form a form of global governance. Click right here to keep watching, because maybe if we watch, we'll see them sign the covenant with the many from Daniel 9:27 that launches the tribulation. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there, and hopefully you'll see what to watch for.